Welcome to the Arun Church podcast, where our mission is bringing life to everyone, everywhere, every day. Each podcast episode features the latest talk from our church, which are released weekly. We're passionate about Jesus, love to worship together, and are committed to changing our community for the better. Connect with us at arunchurch.com.
Brilliant. Good morning, everyone. Morning. A question to start you off. Have you ever been humiliated by someone? How did that make you feel? Just think about that for a second. Also, how did you feel about the person that did it to you? Oh, I tell you what. Makes you angry, doesn't it? If you think back to that situation and you could put yourself in that place and how you felt at that time, I can think of times I was mad because of what that person did, humiliating me, especially in front of other people. On November the 14th, 1960, 6-year-old Ruby Bridges walked towards the doors of William Frantz Elementary School in New Orleans, USA. Her small frame was dwarfed by 4 US Marshals flanking her on each side. She was dressed in a white dress and carrying her school supplies, and she appeared like any other child heading to class that day, except Ruby was not any child. She was the first African-American student to integrate in an all-white elementary school in the South. When Ruby arrived, she was met with a mob of angry white adults, screaming insults and threats at her. Some shouted that she should be sent back. Others carried signs with hateful messages and racial slurs. One woman even held up a miniature coffin with a black doll inside. Ruby kept walking. Inside school, all the hallways, corridors were empty, because the white parents had pulled their children out of the school in protest. And Ruby's teacher, a lady called Barbara Henry, was the only person willing to teach her. For the entire first year of her schooling, Ruby was the only student in her class. Despite the isolation, Mrs. Henry treated Ruby with warmth and respect. Each day she gave Ruby lessons as if the classroom were full. And Ruby, eager to learn, quickly proved herself to be a bright and hardworking student. But even when the stress of her situation caused her to stop eating her lunch, Ruby never missed a day of school. Meanwhile, her parents faced relentless pressure. Her dad lost his job, and the local grocery store refused to serve her family. But they held firm, supported by members of their community and the civil rights activists. Dr. Robert Coles, a psychologist who'd begun meeting with Ruby, asked her how she managed to stay so strong. Ruby told him, 6 years old, that she prayed for the protesters every morning and evening, asking God to forgive them, because as she put it, they don't know what they're doing. Oof. Ruby went on to live a life of compassion. She was a leading lights figure in the civil rights movement. She's age 70 today. She's still alive. But what an example. Can you imagine grown adults shouting at a 6-year-old child because she went to school? And that was in some of our lifetimes. Today, we're continuing the Sermon on the Mount. Haley's done a great job of unpacking this for the kids. Becca started last week with some scenarios of murder, adultery, and divorce, and we're continuing that trend. And it's this section where Jesus looks at an old law from the Torah in the Old Testament, which the Israelites have had for hundreds of years, and he gives his opinion or his take on it, and he reveals a little bit about what God's heart was behind those laws. And so we're going with Matthew chapter 5, starting with verses 33 to 37. Let's put it up on the screen. Oh, there we go. Right. Again, you have heard it said, that it was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the oaths you have made. But I tell you, Do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it's God's throne, or by the earth, for it's his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot even make one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. So it was a common practice in ancient times to make an oath, a vow, a promise based off of something. And you would say, in God's name, I promise I will do this. But often, people didn't really mean to fulfill their vow, or it wasn't that serious, or they wanted to manipulate the situation. And so they wouldn't swear by God's name, they would swear by things kind of related. So they'd say, by the holy temple, I promise I will do that. Or they'd say, oh yes, I swear by my family that I'll pay you back that loan by next week. And it was a way of people making their promises sound pious and holy and brilliant, but actually manipulating the situation so they didn't have to follow through. This happened all the time. And Jesus says, it is better not to say anything. I love how the Message puts this. It says, you only make things worse when you lay down a smokescreen of pious talk, saying, I'll pray for you, and never doing it. Or saying, God be with you, and not meaning it. You don't make your words true by embellishing them with religious lace. In making your speech sound more religious, it becomes less true. Just say yes and no. When you manipulate words to get your own way, you go wrong. Ooh, that's a bit challenging. I know sometimes I kind of might beat around the bush or go around the houses, as our phrases say, because I don't want to say a clear no. I don't want to do that. Or yes, or I'll think about it, or I'll get back to you. Jesus says, yes, let your yes be yes, your no be no, because otherwise you're manipulating people to get your own way. Don't do that. And then the next section, Matthew 5, 38 to 39, Jesus talks about revenge and justice. He says, you have heard it was said, eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. Now, this is brilliant advice. This was a rule that God gave the Israelites back when they came out of Egypt and they were living as a nomadic people wandering around. And God put these progressive laws in place to stop an escalation of violence. Eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. Before that, what was happening was somebody would do something to somebody else and they would retaliate. And then they might retaliate even worse. And then you would see this escalation of violence. And that's how feuds began. We see this. We know this. This still happens today. It's all throughout history. You look at literature like Romeo and Juliet with the Montagues and the Capulets. Feuds start because people want to get revenge. And they play tit for tat. And it just escalates. This rule was put in place to stop that. An eye for an eye and only an eye. Nothing more. A tooth for a tooth. Your tooth gets knocked out, you can knock out their tooth, nothing more. Don't retaliate, don't escalate. So this was a well-known common law that was in place, and everybody knew about it. And Jesus said, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, but I say, do not resist an evil person. Now, this little section has been translated quite controversially at times. The word resist in the Greek is a Greek term called anti-stenai. And stenai means to stand. And it invokes an image of two equal and opposite sides, like an army lined up for battle. One this side across the battlefield, one this side, and it is to stand. You stand. And so an anti-stenai is to stand against. So the word here is to stand against. So Jesus says, do not stand against. But the connotation is to stand against in the same way. Two equal and opposite forces. So if you have an army facing another army, you're standing against in an equal and opposite position. And what Jesus is saying here is, do not stand against in the same way. You could say, don't resist in the same way. Or don't resist evil violently. Or, as Paul says in 1 Thessalonians 5, he repeats Jesus' words and phrases it slightly different, still using anti-stenai. He says, see that no one repays another with evil for evil. So when you put this into context, Jesus is saying, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, But I say, don't repay evil for evil, or don't do the same thing back to somebody else. Don't do it. The phrase that we would use today is, don't fight fire with fire. We all know that one, right? Don't fight fire with fire. This is Jesus' point. He's saying, don't resist evil in the same way that it was done to you. But then he goes on and gives 3 examples of how you should resist evil. So it's not a case of let people walk all over you. When it says do not resist people, some people have interpreted that to mean let people do whatever they like to you and don't say anything. That is not what Jesus is saying. He is not saying people should walk all over you. He's not saying you should be mistreated. He is saying, do not resist them in the same way that they come at you. Let's be creative and do something different. So he gives us 3 examples. And I absolutely love these. First is turn the other cheek. Ash, can I borrow you? Can you come up here? These phrases have entered our language. We know them. Turn the other cheek, go the extra mile. We know them really well, but in Jesus' context, they meant something very specific. So let's put it up here. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek. Now, you're right, Ash. In Jesus' day, and in lots of Middle Eastern cultures, your left hand was seen as the unclean hand that you would use for dirty tasks, like wiping your bottom, for example. So your left hand was not used in public. So when Jesus says, if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, everybody in the crowd listening to him instinctively knows Jesus is talking about your right hand. Now, if somebody slaps you on the right cheek using their right hand, that's the opposite side. So the only way that can happen is if it is a backhanded slap. So I'm the perpetrator here, and I have to hit Ash on his right cheek. I have to use the back of my right hand because that is the hand that would be used. So it would be a backhanded slap like this. And also in Jesus' culture, everybody knew that a backhanded slap was an absolute diss. It was an insult. It was a way of putting somebody down. You didn't do a backhanded slap to someone you considered your equal or superior. You did a backhanded slap to somebody who was inferior and worth less than you. Masters did it to slaves. Sometimes husbands would do it to wives. And it was a really obvious way of putting somebody in their place and saying, I am better than you. You are worth less than me. Shut up. So when Jesus says, if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, everybody knew that he meant this, smack. And what would happen if you slapped somebody on their right cheek? They would turn away and be forced to look downwards, a sign of submission. So when Jesus, in one sentence, says, turn them the other cheek also, what he's saying is, Ash, you actually need to stand up straight. You need to look towards me, and you need to turn your left cheek towards me. Now, if I'm putting Ash down and saying that he's less than me and worth nothing and knocked him downwards, the very act that he has to stand up, look towards me and turn the other cheek is in itself an act of dignity and defiance. And in Jesus' culture, if you punch somebody with your right hand, it was a sign that they were of equal standing to you. You slapped somebody of lesser worth and you could punch somebody of equal worth. Now, Ash has stayed up straight. He's turned his left cheek towards me. I can no longer reach his right cheek. I can't slap him again to put him down. I am left with a choice. I can either walk away or I can choose to punch him as an equal. In one quick turn of phrase, Jesus has flipped the whole situation. If you're in a situation where somebody's putting you down, telling you are worth less than them, they are lording it over you, turn the other cheek, stand up straight, prove your worth and your dignity, and reset the situation and how they see you. Isn't that incredible? Thanks, Ash. Round of applause for Ash. Don't stand against evil in the same way, but, example number 1, turn the other cheek. Force them to reassess the situation and see you in a different light. Number 2. Next one. And if anyone wants to sue you and to take your shirt. Now, Again, in ancient cultures, people generally had two pieces of clothing. They would have a shirt or a tunic, and that was the thing that you would wear against your skin. It was usually linen or cloth or cotton. It was quite comfortable. You would wear it. It would go over your body and your torso. It would go over your midriff and probably down to your knees. And everybody would wear one of these. Most people only had one of these. So you're wearing your shirt. That's the comfortable thing. And then you would wear a coat or a cloak over the top. And that would be, normally have sleeves, and it would be an overcoat. It would be made of rough or coarse hair like goat's hair or something like that. And that would keep you warm in the winter. And back in Exodus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, there are laws about coats. Because a coat kept you warm, you weren't allowed to take a coat from somebody. If you borrowed a coat, if somebody gave you a coat as collateral for a loan, you had to return it every single night because otherwise they may freeze. So the coat was important. You couldn't take the coat. And Jesus is saying here, if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt. Now, everybody hearing this would have laughed. This is a ridiculous situation. To sue somebody means legal proceedings. This means somebody is petty and vindictive enough to take you to court to take your underwear. They can't take your coat, so they've taken you to court to take your undergarments away from you. How sad have you got to be to do that to somebody? And so Jesus says, if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, so remember you're standing there in public space, somebody sued you, they want your shirt, you're left with your coat. Jesus says, give them your coat as well. And what does that mean? You're left naked. By an act of generosity and defiance, you give them your only remaining item, that scratchy, itchy coat that you've now got against your skin. You hand it over, and you are left exposed in the public. And that would be shocking in the culture. But who would the frustration and anger be directed at? Not you, because the person over here has sued you and been that petty, that ridiculous, that they've left you in this situation. They would be the person who would feel the shame because they've left you in that state. How awful that would be for somebody to do that to you. So again, Jesus gives an example where through an act of creative non-violence, you have forced the person who is suing you to reassess you in a different light. It has changed the entire dynamic of the situation, and somebody has to recognize you as a person of dignity and worth, even if you're naked. Interesting stuff. Okay, so then we get on to the third example Jesus has given. This is great, isn't it? I absolutely love these. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Now, out of context, this doesn't make a lot of sense. And we use it quite a lot. We say, go the extra mile, as in, be generous to somebody. Go above and beyond what's expected. Do something nice. But in Jesus' time, Israel, Palestine, was occupied by the Romans. The Romans were hated. They were a foreign force that had come in and occupied. There had been numerous attempts at insurrection. There had been numerous people and people groups who had risen up in Israel to try and overthrow the Romans. All of them had ended in carnage. In fact, about 40 years after this incident where Jesus is talking, Jerusalem is destroyed by the Romans because of all the political intrigue that's going on. So the Romans are a superpower, and they are invading, and they are around everywhere, and you have legionnaires and Roman soldiers and garrisons in different towns, and the people hated them. But there were laws. These legionnaires, they had to carry all of their equipment with them. They were supposed to be self-sufficient. So if they were deployed somewhere, they were supposed to be able to take all their stuff with them. So they had huge packs. These were called sarcenas. And a Roman soldier's pack would probably have a satchel in it. It would have cooking pots and mess tins. It might have a net. It might have an extra cloak or blanket. It might have an axe or an extra sword or some tools in there. And it would all be in this big pack. And it could weigh as much as 85 pounds or 38, 40 kilograms. And they would have to carry these things. But Rome had laws for their centurions and their legionnaires, and they could force ordinary citizens to carry their pack for up to 1 mile. You imagine you're out with your family for a lovely walk on a sunny afternoon. or you're going into the market to get some supplies, and you come across the Romans. First of all, you try and avoid them, but a Roman legionnaire points you out and says, carry this. And you have no choice but to comply because you could be beaten or arrested or taken away. So you have to pick up this heavy pack and go for 1 mile. How humiliated would you feel if you were pulled away from your family and your friends to serve this foreign power and carry their stuff for 1 mile out of your way? People hated it, absolutely hated it. And here's Jesus. If anyone, and by anyone he means a Roman soldier, forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Whew. Don't know about you. At the end of that mile, I would be chucking that pack down and running. But Jesus says, no. Voluntarily, graciously and generously go 2 miles. Now the thing is, these legionnaires, they had rules. They could force people to carry their heavy packs for 1 mile, but they weren't allowed to abuse the rules. They were only allowed to force people for 1 mile, and then they had to let them go and get somebody else to help them. So, if somebody voluntarily takes the pack and refuses to put it down at the end of 1 mile and keeps carrying it, the Roman legionnaire would start to panic because they could be punished. And punishment might be taking away of rations, it might be a flogging, it might be calling out in front of superiors. There could be various punishments for this, for breaking the rules of the Roman army. So simply by refusing to put the pack down and generously saying, I'll keep going, you have entirely changed the rules. This person in the position of power who is lording it over you and forcing you to do something, suddenly is at your mercy. Can you see how that transforms the entire situation? And Jesus, in literally 3 sentences, gives 3 revolutionary examples of how to resist evil in a creative, non-violent way. Isn't that brilliant? I think it's absolutely genius. I love it. I love how this rabbi, this son of God, as he's teaching people, just gives very normal, everyday examples of how you can change a situation, how you can force people to look at you differently, how you can reassert some level of dignity and worth in somebody else's eyes without any kind of violence. It's absolutely brilliant. And in case you didn't get this point, Jesus then says, in verses 43 to 48, you have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, which was a common phrase. The love your neighbor bit is in the Torah, that was a command, but people would add on the extra bit. It became a kind of colloquial phrase, love your neighbor, hate your enemy, even though that wasn't in the law. You've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. Love your neighbor, love your enemies, pray for them, even as they persecute you. So that would have been the person taking you to court to get your underwear. That would have been the person who slapped you in public and putting you down and stating their superiority over you. That would have been the foreign occupation of the Romans who are forcing you to carry their bags and who you hate. Jesus says, love your enemies. And the thing about these scenarios that he gave, they're not just a case of getting your own back in a quiet way. It's not about revenge. It's about reasserting a different relationship. It's about seeing the other person as somebody made in the image of God. He says, you may be children of your Father in heaven, children of God. You will be children of God when you see the worth and dignity in others and reset those situations. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who just love you, what reward do you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Now, that's a challenging word, isn't it? Be perfect. Okay, Jesus, I'll be perfect. Done. Easy. Right? Okay, maybe not. That word perfect comes from the Greek word telios or telio, which means complete or whole. So what Jesus is saying is, when you love people who hate you, you are becoming more like your Father. You are a child of God, seeing the image of God in others, and you will start to become complete. You will start to become whole. You will start to become perfect like your Father is perfect. It's not that you can just make yourself perfect, but we can become whole by following God's will and loving people who hate us. Whew, that's hard, isn't it? That question I asked you at the beginning, I said, think back to somebody who humiliated you. Do you love them? I'm thinking of people that have done that to me. Oh, that's hard. If I'm honest, I still hold a bit of a grudge towards them. Humiliating me. But Jesus says, love people. Because right at the beginning of the Bible in Genesis, God teaches us that we are all, every single one of us as human beings, made in the image of God. There is something about the spark of the divine in you and in the people that persecute you and in those people that humiliated you and in those who don't like you. And when people come against you, do not repay evil with evil, but stand firm in a different way, a third way, a new way. I love the writer Walter Wink. He wrote this. He said, Jesus is not telling us to submit to evil, but to refuse to oppose it on its own terms. We are not to let the opponent dictate the methods of our opposition. He is urging us to transcend both passivity and violence by finding a third way. One that is at once assertive and yet non-violent. Wow. Can we find a new way to engage with others? Okay, we're gonna pray together, and we're gonna go into a time of worship. But I want you to think about a couple of scenarios. Firstly, Jesus invites us through these passages to rethink what we know about enemies and other people. He invites us to creatively respond to evil and injustice with love and generosity. That's a hard thing to get our head around. How can we be loving and generous to those who hurt us? So let's ask a couple of questions. What situations are you facing where someone is treating you badly? How can you respond differently? How can you creatively help them recognize your worth as a person? Or perhaps there are situations where you are treating someone as inferior or of less value than you. Do you need to repent and recognize the image of God in that person? We're going to have a time of worship. We're going to pray together and sing. I invite you all to stand and keep these questions in your mind. If you're in a situation where somebody is hurting you, somebody's doing things to you, treating you with a lack of respect, if you feel hurt by somebody, how can you find a new way to engage with them with love and generosity that does not retaliate? Are you treating anybody badly? Do you need to reset that relationship? This is an amazing invitation from Jesus. All of the things Becca covered last week, all of the things we've covered today are about relationships. A huge chunk of Jesus' main teaching in the Sermon on the Mount is resetting our expectations of what it looks like to be a good human. It's about our relationships, how we treat other people, how we see the image of God in other people. Let's be creative. Let's find new ways, third ways. Okay. As we sing, I'm just going to pray. And as we sing, if you would like to be prayed for about any of the things that we've covered, then come on down the front. There'll be people to pray. We can chat about that. But let's try and answer these questions in our heads. Let's pray. Father God, thank you. Thank you for the teachings of Jesus. Thank you that even today, 2,000 years later, they are revelatory. They are revolutionary. Help us as people of God to reset our relationships. Help us to see the dignity, worth, and value of each other. Help us to recognize God in every single person. And help us to be kind and loving in our response instead of retaliatory. God, give us grace. Amen.